Good evening and welcome to each and one of you to the final event of the webinar series, Öcalan's Paradigm, organized by the network Women Weaving the Future. The aim of these webinars is to bring Öcalan's revolutionary ideas closer to women across the world. Today, 15 December, and the whole week actually, also marks the World Human Rights Week. My name is Karianne Westren. I chair the EU-Turkey Civic Commission, the ECC, and is Professor of Education and Science at the University of Bergen, Norway. I am so honored to moderate this important webinar in such crucial times. We have come together to talk and reflect on the Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan's contribution to Kurdish women's liberation in all its forms. He is, as we know, in Turkish special prison on Imrali Island since his illegal abduction in 1999 and is completely deprived of his human rights. Despite his situation, Öcalan continues to break walls with his tireless political, intellectual, and creative activities. His philosophy and ideas for a free life systematized in his paradigm of democracy, ecology, and women's liberation. Our panel today will discuss the prison conditions of Öcalan, his role in the Kurdish women's movement, his influence in the region, and why his freedom matters so much. Before we proceed to the excellent speakers, I would like to welcome Elif Sarikan, an anthropologist, writer, organizer, and activist in the Kurdish women's movement, and an advisor to the Freedom of Öcalan trade union campaign. She is also the co-chair of the Kurdish People's Assembly. Elif will share a PowerPoint on ongoing initiatives connected to Abdullah Öcalan. Welcome, Elif.
Hi, thank you, Karianne. I'll just share my screen so we can get the PowerPoint going. So, I mean, actually, we would probably need a very long time to talk about all the initiatives that have been formed around the freedom of Abdullah Öcalan, and many people who will speak today will, of course, outline just how and why Abdullah Öcalan's freedom is so crucial, for the Kurdish freedom movement, for Kurdish women, whether it's socially, politically, ideologically, societally, like in many ways. But this is a PowerPoint that is kind of like a condensed version of some of the main initiatives that have been happening. So the logo that you can all see right now is the kind of one of the latest logos for the latest initiatives, which is called The Time Has Come. Obviously, it's the time has come for Abdullah Öcalan's freedom. So this is the first signatories in 1999, which is the year Abdullah Öcalan was captured as a result of an international operation, which again, some people speak about. These are some of the first signatories. And don't worry if you don't catch everything in the PowerPoint, because you can then go back and watch the YouTube and pause and, obviously have a look at some of the details if you want to. So these are some of the first signatories. These are photos of them. And particularly since 2000, so every year since 2000, on the anniversary of the capture of Abdullah Öcalan, so what the Kurdish movement calls the international conspiracy, a large march and then a rally has taken place in Strasbourg. And the reason why it's Strasbourg is because that's where the Council of Europe is located, but also perhaps even more crucially, the European Court of Human Rights have their seat there as well. And this is to, of course, pressure and demand that the European Court of Human Rights, which were also involved in Öcalan's case, actually take a stance and do something about the unlawful treatment and situation of Öcalan. So every year, tens of thousands of Kurds, literally since the year 2000. Well, actually, before that, of course, there was demonstrations all throughout 1999 for his freedom as well. They come together and condemn, again, what the Kurdish movement has called the 15th of February international plot. And again, I imagine, especially Meral will speak a bit about that. So that's that. And these are some photos of the marches. This is a photo from the 14th February 2019 demonstration. And one of the other crucial initiatives have been long marches. And of course, they take their inspiration from other struggles as well, which again, some people today might speak about. And what has been happening, particularly led by the Kurdish youth movement, and again, in more recent years, also by the international youth movement, or internationalist rather, long marches are organized in the lead up to 15th of February, the international conspiracy. And they start in, again, in more recent years, they've started from various different sections of Europe, so Germany, Switzerland, and Luxembourg. Each section led by different elements of either supporters or movements who work with the Kurdish movement. They all converge in Strasbourg, which again is where the European Court of Human Rights is located on the 15th February. And then there's a big march up to that and a big rally. The marches are, from 300 to 400 kilometers long. And the reason why we also mention this is to, the dedication to the freedom of Öcalan. This is a small display of that, of course. Well, not very small, but, one of the displays of that. And it's, diverse peoples and movements. And in recent years, there's been people who have come from all over the world, as far as the depths of South America and South Africa and so on, to participate in these marches. And often parallel to this action, people can't join these long marches, will organize 3-day, shorter but long marches in various local cities, again, demonstrating to condemn the conspiracy, the international conspiracy that took place against Öcalan, and of course to demand his freedom. These are some photos from the long marches from Luxembourg and various parts of Europe. And again, one of the other initiatives that has taken place is bus tours. So the first bus tour demanding Öcalan's freedom took place in 2007 with the leadership of the Kurdish women's movement. It was a very crucial time in 2007 because there was rumors or some reports that Mr. Öcalan, Abdullah Öcalan, was poisoned in Imrali prison. And, upon examination of, I think it was a hair follicle, a high dose of basically a poison was found. And there were protests all over Europe. And in a way, as a political response to this, there was bus tours, particularly, for the freedom for Öcalan, but also to incorporate the paradigm of Öcalan as well into the actions demonstrating for his freedom. In 2012, a bus tour took place under the name of the Peace Bus, and again it was an action for the freedom of Öcalan. It covered 70 European cities and lasted about 2.5 months. And another one took place in 2017, again demanding freedom for Öcalan, and that toured 33 cities in 8 countries and took place, over the space of a couple of months. These are some photos from them. The bottom one you can see is basically a mobile library as well, and there's been, again, to promote and encourage discussion and interest in Abdullah Öcalan's philosophy and paradigm and ideology. There's been mobile libraries that were held across Australia, Canada, and various parts of Europe. And on the 22nd anniversary of the conspiracy, 22 mobile libraries set out to tour, especially with books in various different languages. So some years ago, there was a mass signature campaign, again, for the freedom of Abdullah Öcalan, and 10,328,000 signatures were collected as a result of this. And it was delivered at a rally in Strasbourg on the 13th of February, 2015. One of the other, I suppose, actions, not necessarily initiatives, was large-scale hunger strikes that was started and led by Leyla Güven, who I'm sure many people who have joined this webinar today will know of. And not to mention, actually, again, maybe some people who speak will talk about this, but Leyla Güven was on a hunger strike when she was in prison, and actually more recently has been, again, was arrested and has been handed another sentence, a prison sentence as well, by the Turkish state. But this hunger strike that she started in 2018 in her prison, in the prison she was in, lasted 200 days, and thousands of people joined in solidarity around the world. And in May 2019, upon the call of Öcalan, the hunger strike ended. And so Leyla Güven's one hunger strike lasted 200 days, and the other activists and supporters who also started hunger strikes in support, particularly in Strasbourg, that was ended after 162 days. So these are some photos from that. There's also been some art initiatives. So there's been like Art for Öcalan, artists' declarations for Öcalan's freedom over the years. And these are some examples of the artworks that have been created. If you Google Art for Öcalan, there's more examples that you will come across as well. Also, in the last few years, there's been advertisements in various international newspapers, so some British newspapers, some French, and I know there was other ones in other parts of the world, like, you know, even Australia and so on. So that was important. There's also for 9.5 years, there's been a freedom vigil for Öcalan, which was started on the 25th of June 2012 in Strasbourg, and it continues uninterrupted. So each week the vigil is handed over to a new group of people, so it, you know, kind of like a changeover of shifts, and it consists of at least 5 people, and this has lasted for 9.5 years. Again, another demonstration of the dedication to Öcalan's freedom. There's also been, you know, dozens of conferences held in many parts of the world, particularly discuss Öcalan's ideas and other aspects and elements of the Kurdish freedom movement and Kurdish women's movement. Some of the biggest ones have been in Hamburg in 2012, 2015, and 2017. One of the most important initiatives and historic initiatives in the last 2 years has been the UK trade union campaign for the freedom for Öcalan, which Claire will speak more about today, so I won't go into detail. And these are some photos from the solidarity actions from trade unions across the UK. This is from the Durham Miners Gala in 2018. It's one of the biggest, labor festivals, I think, in Europe. Maybe Claire can clarify this. And in 2018, it was attended by 200,000 people, and the official international theme of the Durham Miners Gala was freedom for Abdullah Öcalan. And more recently, there was what was called the Boat of Freedom from the 8th to the 12th of November from Athens to Napoli in Italy. And there was participation from 50 people, you know, from many walks of life and from many areas of the world that traveled from Athens to Napoli, again, to demonstrate for the freedom of Abdullah Öcalan. This is a photo from that. And yeah, that's it. I won't hold you for too much longer. And yeah, excited to hear everyone speak today.
Thank you, Elif. It's really amazing to see how many initiatives there are for support of Öcalan. And it's unbelievable that the international establishment is so absent. So I'd like to call on the European political institutions to finally take some steps to free Öcalan in order to clear the table for peace negotiations. It's a pleasure to introduce the speakers, which we are very much looking forward to listening to. Each of you has 15 minutes, and there will be room for questions from the audience when I announce the Q&A session after the speeches at the end. And the first speaker is Raziye Öztürk from Mardin, North Kurdistan. She studied law in Istanbul and has been working as lawyer since 2012. She was a board member of the Solidarity Association with the families of arrested and condemned, and the Right Association for Freedom. Since 2014, Raziye has worked as Öcalan's lawyer and is, since 2019, one of his lawyers at the Asrin Law Office. Raziye will analyze Öcalan's conditions of detention and his legal situation. Welcome, Raziye. We're looking forward to listening to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a minute. Elif, ekran paylaşımı yapamıyorum ama açmanız gerekiyor. I can't share the PowerPoint.
We just need to make you a co-host.
Oturum sahibi katılımcının ekran paylaşımını elde ediyor.
Okay, you should, şimdi yapabilirsin.
Sanırım. Evet. Hello everyone. I would like to salute and say thank you all. Thank you all the women who participated and and contributed to this precious panel discussing the paradigm and philosophy developed by Mr. Öcalan. While this panel will end today, I hope that more of its kind will follow. This panel has once again shown us how the paradigm and philosophy worked out by Mr. Öcalan can bring relief for all the peoples around the world. Challenge a misogynistic system and the powers promoting Mr. Öcalan trying to build a model of democratic modernity. For the last 23 years, he has been doing this while held in absolute isolation. Today, as one of Mr. Öcalan's lawyer, I would like to briefly summarize the conditions under which he is presently being held in prison. But before I get to the present situation, it's really important to give a short outline of his 23 years imprisonment and the historical background. As you know, Mr. Öcalan and a group comrades founded the Kurdistan Workers' Party in 1978. Their aim was to ensure the freedom and rights of the Kurdish people. By 1984, they had no choice but to take up arms. Mr. Öcalan worked hard for a democratic solution during the conflict, declaring unilateral ceasefires in 1903, 1905, and 1908. However, he couldn't find any actors in the state who were willing to solve the Kurdish issue. The states always responded by trying to suppress and liquidated the movement. Thousands of Kurds were killed in extrajudicial and arbitrary executions. Their villages were burned, and they suffered great losses, both material and non-material. Naturally, this also led to serious social, economic, and political crises throughout the country. Whenever a possibility for peace negotiations arose, these possibilities were thwarted through different conspiracies. The agents of these conspiracies were the Gladi organization, as the primary agency of capitalist modernity and its extensions in Turkey. Meanwhile, Mr. Öcalan stated that they wanted to me switch sides, but I refused to do so. I stand with the peoples. Subsequently, attempts were made to kill Mr. Öcalan. For example, on May 6, 1960, Öcalan was talking on the phone when a bomb-laden vehicle detonated near the house in which he was staying. Immediately after the explosion, newspapers in London reported that Öcalan was killed in a bombing. This showed that England had known about the incident beforehand. Öcalan himself responded to this attempt assassination by saying, I sent them a letter about peace and the fraternity, saying let's end this war, but I got a bomb in return. 1908, when Mr. Öcalan was located in Syria, was also the first time a USA president visited the Syrian government. In their secret 4-hour meeting, Clinton and Assad discussed a collaboration to get Mr. Öcalan out of Syria. In fact, it was later reported in press that the CIA had traveled Damascus to offer the Syrian authorities a package. Faced with military and diplomatic pressure, the Syrian government chose to take the deal and force Öcalan to leave Syria. Leaving Syria, Öcalan basically had two options: taking to the mountains or going to Europe. Taking to the mountains would have implied a further escalation of the war, aggravating the political deadlock. Although going to Europe was risky, Öcalan had to try it, solution and peace. Thus, Öcalan opted for Europe and launched what he called the European move. In doing so, he wanted to garner international support for the efforts towards a democratic solution and peace, promoting these efforts at the European and international level. But immediately after the ceasefire became effective on September 1, 1908, the Turkish state launched an international conspiracy to exert military and diplomatic pressure on Syria. On October 9, 1998, Öcalan left Syria, from where he went to Athens and Moscow and finally Rome. Meanwhile, Öcalan continued to search for support for a peaceful solution of the Kurdish issue. He tried to resolve the tensions through his statements and interviews he gave the different newspapers. He insisted on a peaceful solution, but the conspirators didn't give up either. In Greece, where he went upon an invitation, his request for asylum was rejected. In Italy, it was put on hold. Meanwhile, the USA frequently voiced that countries needed to deport Öcalan. Under the coordination of the USA, England, and Israel, Öcalan was literally trapped and finally abducted to Turkey on February 15, 1999. Öcalan himself later commented that he had been taken hostage not by Turkey, but by capitalist modernity. Turkey was included in this play only a later point. This explains why then Prime Minister Ecevit declared, "I don't know why they turned him over." Öcalan was brought to Turkey on February 15, 1999, but there was another part to the plan. Already on February 4, 1999, it was decided where and how he would be imprisoned. After that date, the semi-open Imrali prison, which is located on island in the Marmara Sea, was evacuated and transferred to the general staff. Over the course of the last century, the island witnessed a lot of suffering, exile, and execution. Many renowned intellectuals, artists, writers, and political were detained and executed here before Öcalan. But for Öcalan's detention, the island and its surroundings were declared a restricted military zone, and it was redesigned to accommodate one single person. Imrali prison, in terms of both the way it ran and its physically structure and purpose, is the first Guantanamo type of prison in Europe. Yes, so this is how we can summarize what happened during and before the abduction of Mr. Öcalan. What happened next? In his first meeting with his lawyers after he was brought to the island prison, Öcalan underlined that the ceasefire of 1908 was still invalid. Thus, he prevented the internal conflict that some wanted to create, and also the deaths that would have come with it. After all, the illegal and unethical abduction of the Kurdish people's leader would have been a major reason for increased violence and conflict. But Mr. Öcalan frustrated this plan. Mr. Öcalan was tried by a farcical court set up in Imrali Island prison within 2 months and finally sentenced to death. This judgment became final with a short period of time. The European Court of Human Rights held that Öcalan's trial had not been fair, that he should be retried. But the competent Turkish court didn't arrange a new trial for Öcalan, but simply re-examined the file, and the decision was the same. The European Court, however, didn't find that Turkey violated the law by avoiding a retrial and only re-examining the file. Nor did the European Court find that Öcalan's abduction had violated the law. The death sentence was not executed, but subsequently a new concept was introduced which targeted to slowly kill Öcalan. According to a new legal regulation, Öcalan was going to be held in prison until his death. After the death sentence was lifted, Öcalan could have been released from prison 30 years later. This was according to the laws effective at the time. However, new laws were introduced to make sure that Öcalan would not avail himself of such opportunity. These laws, which we call the Öcalan laws, were implemented across Turkey. Mr. Öcalan was held in cell-type room in Imrali Island prison for 10 years. Referring to this room, Öcalan stated, "I spent 10 years in a coffin." In this airless, dark, and narrow space, cameras and officers watched him 24 hours, 7 days. His hair was shaved off and there were attempts to poison him. Family and lawyer visits were restricted or completely prevented. Bad weather or technical problems with the coaster were presented as the reason for preventing these visits from taking place. There also were restrictions on newspaper and books, and incoming letters were either not handed to Mr. Öcalan or blacked out. As if he was not already held in cell, he was often subject to cell confinement penalties. Essentially, all these physical and psychological interventions had the aim of co-opting Mr. Öcalan or breaking his will, but he never surrendered to this condition. I can show you all photo from Imrali Island and his room just here. Yeah. In 2009, some changes were made to the prison following recommendations met by the CPT and pressures coming from other human rights organizations. Among other things, 5 persons were brought from other prisons. However, the only effect this had was that the Öcalan's individual isolation was turned into the group isolation. Moreover, the prison was equipped with a TV set for the first time. Yet again, only a few channels were made available. However, Öcalan's room, which comprises his bed, toilet, sink, and table, became even smaller. When the peace talks started in 2012, the other prisoners were sent back to the original prisons. Instead of them, a new group prisons who could serve as sort of secretary during the resolution process were transferred to the island prison. However, when the peace process was put in the fridge, as Erdogan himself declared, 2 of these prisoners were again sent back and other prisoners brought to the Imrali Island. Currently, 4 other prisoners are being held in the prison alongside Mr. Öcalan. None of these prisoners have been able to receive a single visit from their lawyers since they were transferred to the prison in 2015. One aspect.
Excuse me, Razia. Is
Yeah.
it possible to see the different slides? That you change the slides when you talk?
Okay, I will, because I catch. Okay, I'm here
Sorry.
now. Okay.
Yeah.
One aspect I want to particularly underline here: after the start of their solution process, 3 family Kurdish politicians were murdered by Gladio in Paris. Also, there were some dark deeds intended to create internal turmoil in Turkey. Despite these developments, the process was continued. In fact, the draft for a bilateral peace agreement was read to the public in Istanbul, but in the end, it was Turkey that disappointed in 2015. After 2015, the peace delegation was not allowed to visit the island anymore. The state now wanted to do politics without Öcalan in Turkey. Meanwhile, we all saw how peaceful Turkey was in the days when we heard from Öcalan, whose paradigm and roadmaps brought relief for all peoples. A politics without Öcalan essentially means chaos, violence, and crisis. This is also demonstrated by recent developments. Following the coup attempt in Turkey in 2016, all fundamental rights of Öcalan and all other prisoners were abolished in this period. There were serious rumors about Öcalan's death. Also, Öcalan was indefinitely banned from receiving any visits by his lawyer. Let's note that these visits had already been prevented since 2011. Visited by family members were banned indefinitely. Öcalan's right to communicate by phone banned indefinitely. Meanwhile, it should be noted that Öcalan had not been able to exercise these rights since he was brought to Ireland. And finally, Öcalan was banned from using all kinds of communication means, including mail, telegram, and fax. For a long time, it was impossible to receive any news from Imrali Island. The state of isolation was turned into a state of absolute isolation. As a result of social protest, his brother was allowed to see Öcalan in 2016. That is, after 15 months of silence. The CPT visited the island in 2016, but didn't issue any statement to resolve people's concern. 2 years later, it published its reports on this visit. After Öcalan was visited by his brother, he was once again held from receiving visits from his family. The authorities referred to consecutive disciplinary penalties as the reason for this circumstance. Likewise, the ban on lawyer visit, which had been interrupted in 2011, was continued. In November 2018, family Kurdish politician Leyla Güven went on a hunger strike. Her demand was that the state of absolute isolation in Diyarbakir prison, where she herself was located at that time, was ended. This protest, which was led by a woman, continued growing. Thousands of people inside and outside prisons joined the hunger strike. Prisoners' mothers gathered in front of prison to support their children's protest, and the resistance grew. After more than 200 days, this woman-led protest led to results. Although there still were restrictions, Öcalan was allowed to see his family members and then also his lawyers. The public showed great interest in this meeting. Öcalan had a total of 5 meetings with his lawyers. In these meetings, he evaluated the political situation and sent his message to public via his lawyers. During these meetings, he also shared the following observations regarding the issue of women, pointing out that the 5,000 years of absolute slavery of women was written into society's DNA. He underlined that this mentality gave rise to massacres, violence, and attacks against women. Öcalan also noted that under such condition, marriage, the relation of husband and wife, means slavery. Society, he says, makes up for the rest. Thus, he tried to show how this relationship worked to conceal and generalize exploitation and oppression within this system. Finally, Öcalan also said that women didn't sufficiently oppose the fact that femicide was so common. He pointed out that these killings were very brutal and mostly committed by men who are part of the killed women families. Women therefore needed to see any injustice done to the other woman as an injustice done to them. Child marriage, femicide, each of these alone is a sufficient reason to revolt and rebel. Öcalan also emphasized that the murders of women are not individual cases, but an all-out attack against women. During his last meeting with his lawyers on August 7, 2019, Öcalan once again showed how much he is in favor of peace. Referring to the Turkish-Kurdish conflict, he said, "Give me 1 week and I will end this conflict." However, the response to Öcalan peace and the solution-oriented stance was to close the doors of Imrali. The CPT visited Imrali Island in 2019 and published a report on this visit in August 2020. The CPT described the situation in Imrali as a form of incommunicado imprisonment and underlined that the reason given by the government for this state of isolation were deceptive. It emphasized that aggravated life imprisonment, that is, imprisonment until the prisoner's death, constituted torture. and once again urged Turkey to change this regime. The CPT called on Turkey to ensure that family and lawyer visits take place to put an end to the disciplinary penalties and to give prisoners more opportunities for seeing each other, for outdoor and the social activities. The government, on the other hand, further intensified the state of isolation in prison. After the last lawyers visit a family visit that took place after a fire broke out on Imrali Island. There were no more visits to island. During the time he spent in the prison, Öcalan made only 2 phone calls with his family. The first of these took place in 2020 due to the pandemic. The second after rumors about his death had circulated on social media, but the connection was lost after 2 minutes. During the call, Öcalan reacted to the fact that his rights were limited to a single phone call. He said they should apply the law and let my lawyers come to see me. Then the phone connection was cut off. Since this phone call on March 25, 2021, we have not received any news from Mr. Öcalan and the other prisoners on the Imrali Island. But we certainly have taken and continue to take all legal initiatives in this regard. However, in Imrali Island prison, all kinds of prohibitions are applied, while none of the fundamental rights are recognized. We, as a Öcalan's lawyer, are prevented from seeing him. The files regarding the bans and disciplinary penalties given to him are hidden from us. Thus, the files concerning our clients are finalized and implemented before we can even object to them. Imrali Island is completely governed by politics. Universal laws does not apply here. The last 23 years have clearly shown this. Meanwhile, Turkey is further encouraged by the silence and inaction of institutions like the CPT and the European Court. According to Mr. Öcalan, his own freedom will only be possible by creating a fully democratic system based on emancipation of the individual and society. As those most targeted by capitalist modernity, we as women must continue to fight to challenge this patriarchal, unequal system and promote democratic modernity. As the greatest colony, as Mr. Öcalan described it, and as the most oppressed class, we women have the great responsibility of leading the way with our work. I believe that panels like this will contribute greatly to this struggle. I salute everyone involved in this struggle and wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rasia, for providing us with this first-hand information on Öcalan's conditions. And it's really shocking that even after the 2020 report from the CPT, that nothing had happened, that there are no consequences to Turkey. Okay, we will proceed to the next and that Imrali, who works at the Kurdish Women's Relations Office, DEPAC, which she co-founded in 2014 in southern Kurdistan. Imrali is an editorial board member of the Genealogy Journal and writes a weekly column for the daily Kurdish newspaper Yeni Özgür Politika. Meral will talk about the role of Öcalan for the liberation of men. Welcome, Meral.
Thank you, Kariane, and thank you, Razia, also for giving us such a detailed insight in the detention conditions of Abdullah Öcalan. So I will try to talk briefly about the relationship between the Kurdish women's movement and Abdullah Öcalan, or better said, the role of Abdullah Öcalan for the Kurdish women's liberation movement. There's one slogan of the Kurdish women's movement saying, Öcalan's freedom is our freedom. But what do they really mean with the saying? How can the freedom of Öcalan be the freedom of Kurdish women? I would say that one of the most misunderstood or misinterpreted aspects of the Kurdish women's movement is its relationship to Abdullah Öcalan. Some mostly Western people used to say, why do you as women's movement have a male leader? If you accept a man as leader, then you cannot be emancipated. And this shows that in essence, you are not progressive, but depend on men. These people would never ask the same question to Marxist feminists, for example. For sure, I do not aim to compare Abdullah Öcalan with Karl Marx. Abdullah Öcalan is also not a father figure to the Kurdish women's movement, comparable with, for example, Habib Bourguiba, who was president in Tunisia from 1957 to 1987, and whose relationship with the feminist movement in Tunisia is often described as state feminism. To understand the relationship between Abdullah Öcalan and the Kurdish women's movement, or the dialectics between his freedom and women's freedom in Kurdistan, it is crucial to have a look at his very unique approach to the gender question and women's liberation. This is the most essential point that distinguishes him from other revolutionary socialist leaders and ideology makers. In Abdullah Öcalan's paradigm, the question of freedom is inseparable from women's freedom. In his thinking, women's liberation builds the nucleus of the freedom question, because for him, in history, power relations and oppression start with the enslavement of women and the shift from matriarchal societies to patriarchal state-based civilization. In his conceptualization of the history of power, woman as social existence built the first slave, the first colony, the first oppressed class in the 5,000 years old history of the patriarchal system. Therefore, the question of women's and of society's liberation is not a secondary after class and national liberation, but a primary conflict in the struggle against domination. For him, the nucleus of exploitation, of oppression, of power, and of domination is hidden in the women's question. The enslavement of women marks the initial point in the history of exploitation, and therefore social change, transformation, and liberation is only possible through or in a dialectic relation to women's liberation. This in turn requires an autonomous women's movement within the broader revolutionary movement with separate structures based on a truly radical and revolutionary women's liberation ideology. Without an autonomous women's movement with own decision-making bodies and equal participation and representation in all mixed structures based on the co-chair system and its right to veto decisions, it wouldn't be possible to challenge and change power relations within the movement and the society in Kurdistan. Otherwise, the struggle would focus on national liberation, on planting a flag on a peace on earth, rather than building a free life and a free society possible through a revolution, which is in essence a women's revolution. Many issues about the Kurdish women's movement, which inspire today millions of people around the world, are the result of Öcalan's theoretical and practical work. The idea that women within the Kurdish freedom movement should be organized separately, not like women's branches of a party, but really autonomously, was his idea. The same applies to the founding of the Women's Guerrilla Army, an ideological women's cater party within the PKK, Democratic Confederalist Women's System as organizational umbrella, the co-chair system with a woman and a man sharing the same position, as well as equal participation and representation of women in political bodies. Öcalan's approach to the women's movement is not tactical, but strategic. A few years ago, during talks with the Turkish state, he explained his approach to the women's liberation struggle as follows. The 5,000 years old male-dominated culture is a rapist culture. We are trying to bring the 9,000 years old broken women's reality again to feed as free women's reality. Therefore, the endeavor of women builds the core, the flower of all our negotiations, because the women's question is a cultural, political, economic, and sociological question. My dialogue with the state aims to bring together the project of the democratic society with the democratic state in favor of women's freedom. End of the quote. During the talks from 2013 to 2015, Öcalan struggled very, very hard to make the Turkish state accept a separate representation of the women's movement in his negotiation delegation. The Kurdish women's movement calls Abdullah Öcalan leader, but the characteristics of this leadership should be specified. It's not so that Öcalan tells the woman what to do and they just carry out his commands. We're not talking about such a relationship between him and the women's movement. If so, the women's movement would not be able to grow, they would not be able to make progress and also to determine the whole liberation struggle in Kurdistan. Öcalan's way of leading, his style as leader, focuses on empowering, on supporting, on analyzing, criticizing, encouraging, reflecting, urging, giving wing to the woman and the struggle for a free life. While doing this, he did and does not abstract or separate himself from the question of freedom. On the contrary, his efforts for the development of the free women's movement within the revolutionary struggle of Kurdistan always went parallel to his own reflections and analysis about the way masculinity is constituted in his own personality. He conceptualizes this part of the struggle as project for killing the dominant man. His own life, his experiences, his relations have always been object of open analysis, reflection, and self-criticism. Thus, Abdullah Öcalan locates his personal struggle for liberation within the framework of the gender liberation struggle inside the PKK and the broader Kurdish liberation movement. And that means he does not separate his freedom from the state of free life in Kurdistan and worldwide. In the same way, the women's movement does not separate from freedom of women in Kurdistan from Abdullah Öcalan's freedom. But the dialectic between Öcalan's freedom and women's freedom has also political dimension. Öcalan's detention represents the confinement and isolation of everything he stands for. Putting him in prison aims to prevent the revolution in Kurdistan from being successful and coming into fruition. The revolutionary struggle in Kurdistan is female. In this context, the international conspiracy, this NATO operation, which resulted with Öcalan's captivity in February 1999, also aimed and still aims to liquidate the women's liberation struggle in Kurdistan and to counter the women's revolution. Therefore, his imprisonment and isolation is an attitude of the patriarchal hegemonic system against women and their struggle for freedom. And that's the reason why we as women, we as Women's Liberation Movement of Kurdistan say, Abdullah Öcalan's freedom is our freedom, freedom for Abdullah Öcalan. Thank you.
Thank you, Meral. It is really, really interesting listening to you. And I really liked your point that why do we never ask the question to Marxist feminists who they are inspired by and led by? And that was a really good point. I haven't thought of it actually. So thank you. I'll proceed to the next speaker, the third speaker, and that is Claire Baker, who has worked in the trade union movement for 20 years and has been involved in education and equality programs. Claire works in the international department of Unite, the union in the UK, and coordinates the union's work with the global and European trade union federations. And she also works on several Unite solidarity campaigns, including on Colombia and Palestine, and is the secretary to the trade union campaign Freedom for Öcalan. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you very much, Carrie-Anne, and thank you for the invite to this meeting today. It's pretty daunting to come third after such two fantastic women before me. But I'll do my best to give an overview of the work that the UK Trade Union Campaign for the Freedom for Öcalan has done. As Carrie-Anne said, I am an international officer for Unite the Union, and I sit on the steering committee as secretary to the Freedom for Öcalan campaign. So the UK and the trade union movement globally has a powerful and a proud tradition of international solidarity with oppressed people from around the world. We do a lot of solidarity work with Palestine, with Colombia, we've worked in South Africa, we work with people in Western Sahara, and we advocate and stand with people that have suffered in the fight for social justice, democracy and freedom. We were absolutely critical in making calls for the release of Nelson Mandela. And trade unions are the largest civil society movement in the world, and we're uniquely placed to educate and mobilise millions of workers on progressive projects. This is important for all social justice campaigns, no matter what the country. We're able to get the message out to a huge audience of people who would not normally know about the cause. For the trade union movement, Öcalan and his writings are reflective of our values. Grassroots democracy, women's liberation, equality and ecology are all things that we are also fighting for. And following the historic battle for Kobani, that saw the men and women of the YPG and the YPJ fight back against the barbarism of ISIS, the campaign, the trade union campaign itself, was officially launched in the UK Parliament in 2016 by the trade unions Unite and the GMB. And from there, we've grown to include 16 national trade unions. The newest one that has just come on board is the University Teachers, the UCU, our confederation, the TUC, and the trade union law firm, Thompson's. And we're co-chaired by Unite's Director of International, Simon Dubbins, and the Labour peer, Baroness Christine Blower. And we specifically have two chairs, the co-chair system, the man and the woman, in reflection of the Kurdish political movement to ensure that women are at the heart of political and social power. At the centre of our goals, of the campaign's goals, is Öcalan and his freedom and for peace in the region. And the following are the actual aims of the campaign itself: the immediate release of Abdullah Öcalan and all Kurdish political prisoners, to lobby for peace in the region and a peaceful resolution to what has become known as the Kurdish question, and to promote civil society in the interest of democratic rights and social. That is that the campaign is workers. And our aim is to talk to people who have very little exposure to Öcalan, to his ideas, and exposure to the Kurdish women's movement. We need to demonstrate to workers, especially women workers, how important Öcalan is to their lives. But in a time of crisis that we're in at the moment in the UK, especially with COVID and Brexit, we have to be honest that this is a difficult task, but it is a reality. The media itself barely touches on Öcalan, and when it does, much of it is in a negative connotation. So we need to overcome that as well. It's about talking to workers, to the union members, expanding on what they know about the campaign and getting them to support and to advocate for the campaign. We have to appeal to the union member, for example, that works on the shop floor of, say, a car manufacturer who's got a busy life with many things competing for their time. So we have to have this clear and straightforward message. And it can be done. We've seen it happen with, the Freedom for Mandela campaigns. All people across all of society got behind that. And Öcalan's situation is extremely similar to that of Mandela, and people will understand that comparison. So I just wanted to highlight a few of the key reasons why Öcalan is important to the trade union movement, and also some of the work that we've done. One of the things that's very important is the society that's being built in Rojava, which reflects obviously the writings of Öcalan. And what has happened there is a true inspiration for the trade union movement. And it actually means that our solidarity, as is the case with many of our campaigns, which is usually just one way, we give them solidarity in support of what's happening to them, actually in this case is a two-way street. We are giving them solidarity. They are in a very vulnerable position, but we have a lot to learn from them as a movement, from their co-chair system and from the women's revolution. The Kurdish women's political movement has been a real eye-opener for many trade union women that have come on board. It's not only impressive that it's grown and flourished in an area of the world which has a history of extreme repression of women's rights and freedoms, but the work the women have done to confront the misogynistic culture and make a real change for women living, especially in the areas of Rojava, in the Kurdish areas of Turkey, is really groundbreaking. The Kurdish women's movement challenges us and has shown us here in the West that there is another way to achieve gender equality, and that we have a lot to learn, and that can only be a good and a healthy thing for women's liberation globally. And the Kurdish women's movement's achievements are even more astounding in the face of the growing attacks on women's rights and freedoms in Turkey itself. The withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention, the closing of women's organisations, laws that have been put in place that are very anti-women, the specific targeting violence against women who stand against all of these attacks and stand up for peace and equality. So Öcalan's writings are also important to the trade union movement, as he shows that a movement can grow and change and not just stick to an orthodox dogma that many on the left are afflicted with, which reminds me of what Meryl has just been saying, about the Marxism stuff. A lot of the left will very much stick to those thought processes and stuff and not move away from them. But Öcalan is very different. He adapts and he moves with the changing world around him. But everything is always grounded in the message of peace and equality. So in terms of work that the campaign has done, and that we've organised and that we've taken part in, there's a number of high profile and high impact events. Elif showed you some pictures earlier which included some of them. As Elif said, it was the international theme of the Durham Miners Gala in 2018. It is one of the oldest and the largest working class events in the UK and in Europe. It involves a march through the town of Durham and a huge rally with speakers from the political and solidarity world, with around 150 to 200,000 people watching. So that many people were exposed that year to who Öcalan was, and in subsequent years we've had marches there as well. In 2018, we also hosted an event in London City Hall, which is the seat of the London Mayor, which the Turkey embassy itself tried to shut down and stop. To which we didn't cancel it, because all the general secretaries of all the affiliated trade unions wrote to the Turkish embassy to refuse to cancel this. But it just shows you the pressure that's on outside of Turkey on any kind of Öcalan campaigning that goes on. The second largest working class event in the UK is the Tolpuddle Martyrs Festival, which in 2019, the campaign was also the international theme. And again, here people could learn about what the campaign was, see the Kurdish culture and support the campaign. We've also had actions at our trade union conferences where we've held up pictures of Öcalan's face at the TUC conference in 2019. This was a huge action, and the importance of it cannot be underestimated in the trade union movement globally. The fact that the TUC did this would have put other trade union confederations at ease and will make them more willing and more open to be supporting this campaign. And this year, my union, Unite, which is the largest private sector union in the UK, also held the same action, where all the people in the conference held Öcalan's face up in support of his freedom. We've obviously hosted a lot of fringe meetings at our conferences, at the UK Labour Party conference, and obviously during the time of COVID, we've arranged lots of online meetings with participation from trade unions across the globe, across Europe, Australia, South Africa, North America. And as unions, we have relationships with Labour MPs in the UK Parliament. And through that, we've been able to advocate for Öcalan and the Kurds. We've taken a cross-party delegation, which has included members of the Conservative ruling party in the UK, to Rojava, so that they can see firsthand the society that has been built there, as well as how vulnerable it is to Turkey. And following this, the MPs involved, led by the Labour MP Lloyd Russell Moyle, have held a UK parliamentary inquiry into the situation facing Kurds in Turkey, which included evidence from a variety of political, human rights defenders, Öcalan's lawyers, women's organisations in Turkey, and a number of which appeared before the MPs to answer questions. The report itself has now been published, and it contains some real steps forward in regards to what parliamentarians are asking of the UK government in support of the Kurdish political movement and civil society. And crucially, it has cross-party support. So we move on to what the recurring theme has been through all of our kind of online meetings and delegations and stuff like that. And the recurring theme throughout has been Öcalan's isolation. And this isolation and the impact and significance of that across all of the civil society is another key reason that this campaign is important to trade unions. Yes, his isolation is against international and Turkish law and is part of a systematic torture against this one man, but it also represents the isolation that Turkey is putting his ideas, Kurds, women, trade unions, teachers, journalists, opposition parties, and even peace itself under as well. And that situation of oppression facing any of these groups in Turkey and beyond its borders, where it is extending its aggression, is intrinsically linked to Öcalan's own incarceration and isolation. During the 2021 Imrali delegation that the campaign took part in, and during the evidence session for that parliamentary APPG report that I mentioned, Turkish trade unionists highlighted the situation facing independent trade unions in Turkey. And it's very apparent that Erdogan is attacking all progressive forces in the country. The war on Kurds has extended to the war on all who oppose him and all who stand up for human and worker rights. And in the recent ITUC Global Rights Index, Turkey sits in the top 10 worst countries in the world for workers. Real independent trade unions have found it extremely difficult to function and to organise. Those independent trade unions display real bravery, as do any opposition people in and human rights defenders in Turkey. But these trade unions display this bravery by continuing to defend workers' rights and campaign for peace in the face of continuing repression, violence, and intimidation. The erosion of democracy and rights and the rule of law in Turkey means that defending workers' rights comes with extraordinary risks. In fact, many of the trade unionists that the union movement in the UK speak to in Turkey are under investigation by the state and likely face trial, imprisonment, and others are in exile. And as a movement, we must be extremely concerned that international organisations such as the CPT have not done enough against or taken a sufficient stance against human rights violations in Turkey. At the very least, the European Court of Human Rights must act on its own report about ending the isolation of Öcalan, and the CPT must put real pressure on Turkey, not just this lip service, to end the abuses of political prisoners who face decades and more in prison. with many of those prisoners moved to nationalistic areas of the country and away from their families. And the recent bizarre reports that suggested the reason Öcalan has not seen or spoken to lawyers or family because he was being punished for speaking to other prisoners is a strange, but also another example where Turkey is disregarding its obligations under international law. The pro-Erdogan stance of many countries, especially in Germany, the UK and the US, means that addressing human rights situations in Turkey has become very difficult. Decisions to support the rights and freedoms of Kurds, trade unionists, journalists, women and teachers are not taken, or decisions to actively oppose the expansionist and aggressive foreign policy of Turkey are also not taken because of the economic interests of their relationship with Turkey takes precedence. This stance affects us here in the UK in the trade union movement because the European Union and the UK government and the international community as a whole are basically being blackmailed by Erdogan with the huge number of refugees that are in Turkey from the Syrian conflict, as well as the geopolitical position Turkey holds in the Middle East. And in the UK, the government here is in its absolute desperation post-Brexit for any trade deal at any cost, has led it to make a deal with Turkey without any demands on worker, civil or human rights. This shows us as a movement how little they regard this themselves, and a reason why the trade union movement in the UK must speak out against this trade deal. And in turn, all this is obviously linked with Turkey's violations in human, women, worker and civil rights that we must also oppose. Both Imrali delegations and the APPG evidence sessions show that Turkey will link any organisation that opposes the AKP party or does not fall into their ultra-nationalistic policies with terrorism. These organisations are criminalised and banned. And we see this happening with the HDP and with Kurdish organisations right now, and we're seeing that seep into wider society. This argument to accuse any opposing group of terrorism gives governments like that in the UK, who economically want to trade with Turkey, who want Turkey to keep the refugees off of their shores, and who want to militarily align with Turkey in the region, an excuse to hide behind when challenged over Turkey's human and worker rights abuses. So we see the HDP linked with terrorism, we see independent trade unions, women organisations, human rights groups who speak out in favour of peace or against policies of the government, all linked to terrorism. And policies of war and security are obviously and sadly vote winners anywhere in the world. But in Turkey, with the ongoing crisis, with the pandemic, high unemployment, lots of poverty, the government uses this to cover up with, uses violence and populism and nationalism and war to cover up the declining situation in the country. And sadly, this is a method of control that we are seeing spreading to our own countries. And we in the trade union movement need to play our part in challenging this wherever we see it, as we know where it leads, especially for the working classes. And as I said, the situation that faces the trade unions, that faces Öcalan, that faces the Kurds in Turkey are all intrinsically linked, and progressive forces are under attack. The war on the Kurds and the isolation of Öcalan and his ideas has extended to an isolation and a war on all who oppose Erdogan and who stand up for human and worker rights in the country. We cannot campaign for the rights of Kurds without too campaigning for the rights of trade unions, free civil society, and Öcalan's freedom, and vice versa. And the people that are currently threatened by Turkey's war in Syria and in Turkey itself are directly inspired by the politics and writings of Abdullah Öcalan. And they have suffered greatly for many, many years, and yet have managed to carve out this experimental society, which we are all so drawn to. And we must support it and them. And the freedom for Abdullah Öcalan is absolutely critical for peace in the region, for equality for women, for minority groups, and for democracy. And what happens in Turkey, which is such a crucial country in global politics, has an impact on us all. So, you know, we continue as a trade union movement to campaign for the freedom for Abdullah Öcalan. And I'll leave it there. And many thanks for having me. And I salute you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. It's great to hear how much influence the campaign, the United Campaign Freedom for Öcalan had on women and on other trade unions as well. I'm just looking at the chat function here, and so many has written and asked if there will be possibility to have copies of your speeches, because your 3 speeches I've had already has obviously been very interesting and so would it be possible to have at least for a summary of the speeches on the Women Weaving Future platform, or perhaps also the PowerPoints, so people can reflect on your speeches in calm. So we can think more of that, but we have to go on. There will be possibilities for questions later. So thank you, Claire, and thank all of you. Thank you, Claire, for the solidarity, I have to say. It's really amazing. We proceed to the panels, to the panelists. We would have 3 panelists. But one of them, Grada de Sousa, unfortunately had an accident. But she's fine. But she couldn't attend this seminar. But she sends her best wishes and wishes us good luck and all the best of luck for this seminar. So I let the word go on to the excellent panel of international renowned academics and writers and activists. And the first panelist is Fernas Attia Ahmed. Are you with us, Fernas? She had some problem with she said there is no voice. And I said, I can hear everyone loud and clear. She said, I will try to fix it. I will try to solve the problem, but maybe she's not with us. Fernas, are you there? Fernas, can you hear us? Fernas? Okay. Then I think maybe the second panelist, Fasela Mohammed from South Africa, can start the panel. Fasela has a public administration degree and a certificate in forensics from the University of Western Cape. A certificate of management from University of Witwatersrand, and a fellowship in ethics at the University of Cape. Fasela is a long-standing activist and worked full-time in anti-apartheid movement and now in the Kurdish Human Rights Action Group in South Africa. Fasela served at the parliament for 19 years after the first democratic election in 1994, where she was the lead official in parliamentary and legislative ethics. After the first democratic election, Fasela was appointed head of finance and administration in the Constitutional Assembly, the body that drafted the South African Constitution. Fasela will draw lines of similarity between Nelson Mandela and Abdullah Öcalan, and perhaps more than that. Welcome, Fasela. You're not taking the floor, but please, the screen is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Fazila. I regard myself primarily as an activist. I worked full-time in the struggle against apartheid throughout the 80s. So, this discussion on the release of Öcalan, the principles and tactics of struggle is very near and dear to my heart. As everybody spoke, and the conditions on the ground for the Kurdish people, it has deep resonance with us who fought for freedom in our country. It's easy to make glib comparisons because prison for political prisoners is the same everywhere. If it's based on a system of, if an oppressive regime systematically, detains, the tactics of oppressive regimes is the same everywhere. They first of all reduce any dissent. They detain people without trial. We call it detention without trial. They incarcerate people on spurious grounds. They don't allow legal political organization to continue. They undermine the voices of people who speak up against oppression. So I think that for us in South Africa, it's very easy to understand and identify with the kind of oppression that occurs for the Kurdish people. And obviously there's a lot of similarity and a lot of difference. As much as the apartheid regime was brutal, they did believe in some weird way of the rule of law. So they kept the rights of prisoners, they managed the rights of prisoners in a way that they never undermined their own rule of oppressive law. So they gave Nelson Mandela regular visits. There were arbitrary decisions now and again. So when they stopped letters from coming, or they had a decision that no parent could see children under 18, at Robben Island. But they had a strict set of laws. They never kept people away from their families in all of these years. So the brutality, I think that the Kurdish people face is quite high. But I do think that one of the big differences was that the South African, in our struggle, we spent a lot of time, as the people in the Kurdish struggle, they spent a lot of time building what we call the international arm of the struggle, making sure that the international solidarity is working, that the release of Mandela campaign, and for us, like for Abdullah Öcalan, Nelson Mandela was the face of all political prisoners in our country. And so it represents the face of all political prisoners. I think that the other thing is the similarity. Both Öcalan and Mandela had said that, while, for example, Mandela was the person who initiated the armed struggle, he initiated the armed struggle to get the demands for a peaceful negotiated settlement in South Africa. So armed struggle wasn't there for its own sake, but for the sake of developing, because when you have a regime that doesn't listen, that cannot be shamed through protest or whatever, and who is unable to listen to the demands of the people, you need more drastic action. And in our struggle, we were quite aware that actually there comes a time when peaceful calls no longer work. And in 1961, South Africa, the African National Congress and the armed wing of the ANC made that call. And people then took the decision, to fight the regime. Of course, Mandela, like Öcalan, was called a terrorist. Well before, the leaders of the ANC, Oliver Tambo, who was based in London, they were never allowed to visit. Margaret Thatcher called them terrorists. So it's nothing new to us. All of this thing of labeling, the inaction of leaders who colluded with the apartheid regime. Reagan, Thatcher, all of those people colluded with the apartheid regime and systematically worked against the South African people and the fight against oppression. Of course, post-1994, everybody was our ally and everybody was our friend. But we know that fundamentally it is the voices of ordinary people that moved governments in the West to change. And so first of all, what I need to say is that for us in a struggle, it's ordinary people who speak up, who take to the streets. I don't know, but the South African embassy in London They had daily, the anti-apartheid movement had daily protests outside the embassy for years, for almost decades, actually. Every single day there was a protest and a call for the release of prisoners. And it became a feature of life, in London, to go to an anti-apartheid protest, which happened every single day. So struggle, of course, is universal in a way. But for us in South Africa, I feel a bit sad and a bit embarrassed to admit that even though we have just recently, come through a struggle for freedom, that we sometimes get so caught up in our everyday politics that we forget the importance of international solidarity. I know the TUC has been in touch with our trade unions. I know that. I've spoken to some of the trade union leaders when we tried to lobby them, the South African Communist Party. In South Africa, the leading political party is in alliance with the trade unions, which we call, and the Communist Party, which is called the Tripartite Alliance. And of course, both the SSCP and the trade union movement have been strong supporters of the Kurdish cause. Politically, there has been, and like in the UK, there has been attempts by the Turkish government to co-opt actually senior leadership of the ruling party in South Africa. I won't go into the detail, but we know that a senior political office bearer of the ruling party had a whole lot of students studying in Turkey and was funded by the Turkish state to some extent. So you can see what happens. I mean, what they do is they try to create synergies with people who were subsequently found to be corrupt. I mean, they're facing huge corruption trials, etc. So the co-option of people in the struggle and co-option of idea, trying to co-opt party leadership into kind of repressive regimes is also a tech we know from the apartheid age. So it is really our job to look at how we can go forward. I mean, Nelson Mandela has said on many occasions, it was the voices of ordinary people. I can read a quote that, when Mandela was released from prison, there was a concert at Wembley. I'm sure, Clay, you may remember or not. I don't know, you're quite young. But in 1990, on the 16th of April, 1990, he said, during the days we spent buried in the apartheid dungeons, we never lost our confidence in the certainty of our release and our victory over the apartheid. So I think in the same way, I think the Kurdish people must take hope from that, because you can't hold back an idea whose time has come. Victory will be certain. And what he said further was, this was because we knew that not even the hard-hearted men of Pretoria could withstand the enormous strength represented by the concerted effort of the people of South Africa and the rest of the world. And so, of course, in South Africa, we too, in our struggle and the women's struggle, said, we say in South Africa, watinta bafazi, watinta mbokoto. In other words, if you strike a woman, you strike a rock. So the woman represents the rock and the pillar of the struggle. So, I mean, that was very much fundamentally. And like you, we said that the struggle of women faced, I mean, in our analysis, the way we analyze it, women face 3 levels of oppression. One at the level of kind of apartheid race, then, of course, class, and of course, societal oppression. So we all understood that to fundamentally overcome the oppression of women, we needed to fight those on all 3 levels in South Africa. Of course, like everybody else, this is a work in progress for us. And I think, like Claire said, I think it was, that we have a lot to learn from the struggles of the Kurdish people and the women's liberation movement there, the participation of women in the liberation movement. But as I said, in the end, there must be a cessation of hostilities. There must be the release of political prisoners. There must be the opening of political space to allow people to mobilize support of the Kurdish people. It is only under those conditions can you work towards peace. Often the call for peace in the absence of clear, in the absence, almost in an unequal way, can never build a just peace. So you can't say, peace is one-sided unless the Turkish regime really shows its own commitment to bringing a peaceful settlement. It can't be done. So we know this from our own experience. You know, in the beginning of our negotiation period, the apartheid regime had many what you would call black ops. You know, they killed ordinary people in the townships, they murdered people in a massive way. And it was the last kick of a dying regime, because you can't rule people with force only. You have to have their consent. And in fact, of course, with us, it's a little different because the vast majority of the people were denied their rights. But I think, as you see, the regime, there's a decline in Turkey. I think you can see that. And actually, the time will come for a peaceful settlement, and there will come a time for the social, you know, for the social justice issues to be resolved. So, as I said, you know, there are lots of, you know, similarities. People who are in prison for long periods of time. I think now Öcalan beats Mandela's time in prison. I was very close friends with someone who was with Mandela in prison for 27 years. You know, I worked with him very closely politically. And he often talks about how in prison, even though you face everyday hardships, the hope and the struggles of the ordinary people on the ground really keep you going throughout your time in prison. And I'm sure that Öcalan knows and will know that that the solidarity and the struggles of the Kurdish people must, you know, will lead to a result. I'm not sure if there's anything else, you know, that can come at question time.
Wasila, thank you so much for a great speech. And I'm sure that the Kurdish movement has got so much political and also moral support from you in South Africa. And I remember Assa Musa, because he was working with us for many years. He was one of Mandela's earliest lawyers. And I was so amazed about his way of being. And there were so many, as you said, so many similarities. But the moral support from you is really unbelievable. It's great. So thank you so much. And now it looks like we have Thanas with us.
Yes.
You solved
Hi,
the
how are you?
problem. You solved the problem with
Sorry for this problem.
Oh, you know, the digital equipment doesn't always work. But I'm very
Yes,
happy
and
to.
I have called.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you with us. And Thanas Attia Ahmed is an Egyptian researcher and professor of political science. Thanas has work experiences from various sectors of society, like Cairo University, Regional Center for Strategic Studies, Ministry of Culture, the Office of the Minister, Foreign Cultural Relations sector, just to mention some. Thanas will talk about Öcalan's role beyond the Kurdish context and his ideas of how to establish peace in a broader Middle East. Thanas, welcome.
Okay.
We're happy that you're here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I will talk about Öcalan Democratic Project for Middle East. Okay. First, we have a question. Why we are believe in Öcalan freedom? He presented a distinguished democratic project for Middle East. Öcalan thought or ideas can play an important role in spreading democracy in the Middle East and solve many problems in this region. Actually, Öcalan discussed many fields in his project. and put some solutions to some problems we are suffering now from these problems in political field or social and economic. Okay, in political field, Öcalan talked about democratic nation. This concept means all persons have the same rights, regardless their race, sex, ethnicity, and region and religion. So they have a common culture that integrated them in one country or in one society. By another meaning, it can mean the equity between all people and the citizenship for all citizens. Öcalan also talked about federalism and non-centralization to manage the country. We can say that the Öcalan's political ideas are the core of the autonomy in north of Syria in Kurdish territories. The second point in economic field, Öcalan talked about the productivity cooperative societies, which support the economy of any country and achieve the self-sufficiency. It can solve the problem which we have now all over the world, which causes by corona, okay, and less the production, and make many economic problems in the Middle East and in the other countries. Okay. We will move to the third point and talk about the social field. Öcalan supports women's rights. He urges women to participate in public life, such political and military affairs, to defend her rights and her country. Öcalan said the colonialism has been to threaten our people. Why? Because the concept of violence against women appeared with colonists, such as the rape and assault. He thought that the women issues or women rights in capitalist societies is used as a tool for propaganda, okay, or by showing way in these countries, in the West countries, okay, or the colonial countries, for supporting, not using for supporting women. Or serve the women issues. Dogmatism and weakness in societies. He said that dogmatism and weakness in societies lead to repetition of violence against women, and make this violence okay, it's increased, okay, in this society. In his opinion, the revolutionary solution is the suitable way to solve women problems. Öcalan discussed also the basis of any family. It must be based on equity, freedom, and participatory relationship between women between women and men. In my opinion, linearly democratic ideas and democratic project will be applied sooner or later in Middle East. Öcalan thought will encourage this democratic trend to apply in Middle East and in Arab world country also. These ideas push many people to support Öcalan thought and Öcalan ideas. That's why we launched in Egypt the Arab Initiative, to support the freedom for Mr. Öcalan last year, specifically in last February, to support Mr. Öcalan freedom. And we collected more than 8,000 signatures in this initiative. Okay, I think also we can find powers that try to destroy this project, the project of democracy of Mr. Öcalan, because they refused the changing or the development. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shahnaz. I'm glad you finally joined us. And it's so amazing to hear that also internationally, as you said, the Arab world can benefit a lot from Öcalan's thoughts and ideas and philosophy. And also, as you say, Fasila, Öcalan's thought have similarity to ANC and the struggle you had and still have. Thank you so much. We have...
It's my pleasure.
Sorry?
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, also, thank you.
Sorry for my voice. I
think we can proceed now to the question and answer section. We have 15 minutes left of the seminar. So please, to the audience, those who are following, please write your question in the chat. Present yourself and name the speaker you want to address. Question must be short and concise. Unfortunately, no time for long comments or posts, and not all questions can be answered. So I'm opening to the Q&A. Please ask your questions. Until now, we only have the question about the copies of the speeches, and I think that's a good idea. That should be discussed by the organizer to collect some of the speeches for these webinars.
May I say something on this
yes,
issue,
please,
just as information? So you know that this panel is the final event of
yes.
the webinar series, Öcalan's Paradigm, which started in April. Yeah. And all the seminars, all the talks, and also the talks of this panel will be published as a book. In the near future. So yeah. You will have the opportunity to get all speeches, the seminars, also the previous ones, and also the description, the talks of today's panel. Okay, so just as information, this will be available in English.
Yeah, that's great, because there was the question came from Kuni Ledesma, and now you have the answer, and that is really good news, because there must be a lot of good speeches. That would be great to have afterwards. Yeah. And also from Elif, you can all re-listen to this talk on YouTube in the meantime, and there is a link in the chat. But also the speakers here, you can ask questions to one another if you like. If you want someone to clarify something or underline something in the speech. Linda that says, thank you for organizing all the webinars. I really appreciate it. Does that give meaning to you?
It's Kurdish. It's a way to think. Desthosh.
Yeah. For the previous ones in the series available for listening, yes, you have the answer from Elif. Yeah. From Ellen Rosner, she says thanks for the information from Elif. But now,
sorry.
Yeah.
If there is no question, I would like to comment on something Fazila said. And I think it's very important.
I think if there are no questions, we can have some more comments, or if someone wants to underline or additional information or reflections.
Very briefly, because Fazila, she told us that during the time of his detention, Nelson Mandela was seen as a kind of symbol or representative of the political prisoners in apartheid prisons of that time. And I think that's one challenge we have in Kurdistan and in Turkey, that often, despite the fact that people try to make understandable that Imrali prison as a kind of constant torture system will be a kind of model for all prisons in Turkey, the conditions that you have there, and still many political, let's say, structures or parties or movements kept on saying, why do you prioritize him so much? Why do you talk so much about him? So he's just another political prisoner, And I think that's very important, because in order also to struggle against this torture system in Turkey, for example, today another political prisoner who has been in detention for 29 years lost his life today. Yesterday, another one. So within the last week, 3 political prisoners lost their lives in prison. So I think this is a challenge also, and this should be maybe also part of the campaign, that we make it more understandable, let's say the relation between the detention conditions of Abdullah Öcalan and the rest of the political prisoners in Turkey. I think that's a very important aspect.
Thank you, Meral. Do you have a brief comment or answer to Meral Fazila?
No, actually, I think it's an important point, because while we look at political, Öcalan as the leader represents the idea of the movement itself and the work of the movement, his imprisonment also represents the imprisonment of all others in Turkey. And so I think that often, when the regimes try to make it that it's about a person and that person is fallible and this is the problem with that person, but in fact, he's a representation of the oppression of the people and their oppressive system. So I think that Miral is right. I mean, we don't only talk about individuals, we talk about the overall systemic nature of the oppression. Yeah.
Thank you, Fazila. I think there are no more questions. So I think we have reached the end of the road with this webinar series on Öcalan's paradigm. organized by the network Women in the Future. I would like to thank each of the acknowledged speakers and panelists for their outstanding contributions. I'm glad to hear that there will be a book later. And this has certainly brought us closer to an understanding of the role of Öcalan in the Kurdish women's movement and why his freedom matters so much. So we take this insight with us, and I hereby encourage everyone who's listening to work for Abdullah Öcalan's freedom and reflect on how his ideas can be put into practice in our everyday life. Thanks to the organizers, speakers, the panelists, and the audience for listening. I wish you all a good night, stay healthy, and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.